So when we would leave, he would have the realtor come in and bring the open house signs out so they could show the house.
What if the person you trusted most in your family was secretly plotting to steal everything you owned? Meet Hank and Helen, an 88 and 87-year-old couple who lived in the same house for over 50 years. When they needed money, their beloved grandson stepped in to help. But this wasn't help. This was the beginning of the most shocking betrayal you'll ever hear. Their grandson convinced them to sign over the deed to their $800,000 home, promising he'd get them a loan and give them the money. They trusted him completely. After all, he came over for breakfast every morning. Helen would pack him food to take home. He was family. But while they thought he was helping them, he was actually planning something unthinkable. Every Sunday, he'd take his grandparents out for innocent trips, to the park, to brunch, just spending time together. What they didn't know was that these Sunday outings weren't about family bonding. They were cover-ups for his real plan. Because while Hank and Helen were away, their grandson was secretly bringing strangers into their home. Real estate agents, potential buyers, open house signs. He was selling their house behind their backs. But here's the twist that makes this story even more devastating. When the new buyers knocked on the neighbor's door to introduce themselves, they revealed something that will make your blood boil about what this family really thought of these innocent grandparents. How far would someone go to steal from the people who raised them? In 1960, Hank and Helen stepped through the front door of a modest house in Thousand Oaks, carrying nothing but hope and a few suitcases. The paint was fresh, the yard still bare, the neighborhood just beginning to fill in. Hank, a dance instructor with a knack for the polka and a twinkle in his eye, spun Helen around the empty living room that first afternoon. She laughed, her shoes slipping on the hardwood, and promised him she'd make this place a real home. Over the years, the promise held. Helen filled the kitchen with the smell of fresh bread every Sunday, while Hank taught waltz steps in the garage to neighbors' children, and once, even to Lawrence Welk himself. The house grew with them, walls lined with family photos, a garden blooming out back, a porch swing that creaked under the weight of summer evenings. Birthdays, anniversaries, and quiet weekday mornings all passed beneath the same roof. For Hank and Helen, the house was never just four walls. It was the backdrop to their entire story. They watched their children grow up here, sent them off to college, welcomed grandchildren for sleepovers and backyard barbecues. The mailbox always held cards from old friends, and the phone rang most nights with a familiar voice checking in. Helen kept the same curtains for decades, convinced they held in the warmth during winter. Hank patched the fence himself, even after his knees started to ache. Neighbors came and went, but the Kaweckis stayed. By 2016, they had lived in the house for 56 years. Every corner held a memory. Every floorboard seemed to remember the shuffle of Hank's dancing shoes or the sound of Helen humming as she dusted the mantel. Time moved slowly inside those walls. The world outside changed. New faces, new cars, new houses springing up all around. But inside, the old routines held strong. Hank still set the table for breakfast at dawn. Helen still folded his shirts just the way he liked. They never planned to leave. The idea of losing their home, of walking out that front door for the last time, was unthinkable. This house was their safety, their history, their heart. For Hank and Helen, it was more than a place to live. It was a promise they'd kept to each other for more than half a century. A promise that, until now, had never been broken. By the time Hank and Helen reached their late 80s, the world outside their door had grown much more expensive. Every month, the bills crept a little higher. Property taxes, utilities, prescriptions, groceries. Their Social Security checks arrived like clockwork, but the numbers never seemed to stretch far enough. The house, once a symbol of security, now felt like a burden they could barely afford to keep. Pride kept them from complaining. Helen clipped coupons and stretched leftovers. Hank skipped his favorite Sunday paper, telling Helen he would read it at the library. Still, the gap between what came in and what had to go out grew wider with each passing year. The house itself, by then, was worth nearly $800,000, a fortune on paper, but none of it reachable without risking the only home they had ever known. They had always planned to stay put, to live out their days beneath the same roof. But as medical costs mounted and the old car needed repairs, the idea of borrowing against the house began to sound less like defeat and more like survival. They talked about it late at night, voices low, as if saying it out loud would make it real. That's when Chad stepped in. He was their grandson, the one who used to show up for Sunday dinners and help Hank carry groceries from the car. Chad had a way of making himself useful, changing light bulbs, raking leaves, setting up Helen's new phone. He listened as they talked about their worries, nodding with the easy confidence of someone who always had an answer. Chad offered a solution. He would help them get a loan using the house as collateral. He promised it was just paperwork, a technicality to satisfy the bank. Nothing would really change, he said. They would stay in their home, and he would handle the details. He assured them he would make sure they were safe, that no one would ever force them out. The relief in Helen's eyes was obvious. For the first time in months, she slept through the night. Hank trusted Chad, not just because he was family, but because he had always been there when they needed him. The arrangement seemed simple enough. Chad would take care of the paperwork, and in return, Hank and Helen could keep living just as they always had. It felt like a lifeline thrown by someone who loved them. No one could have imagined, in those quiet evenings around the kitchen table, how quickly trust could become a weapon, or how easy it would be for a promise to turn into a trap. The paperwork arrived on a weekday, thick with legal language and promises. Chad sat at the kitchen table with Hank and Helen, pen in hand, reassuring them that this was just a formality, something the bank needed to see. In truth, the signatures they gave that afternoon in 2014 handed over not just the deed, but the very foundation of their lives. The house, valued close to $800,000, shifted into Chad's name with a few strokes of ink. The couple believed they were securing a loan to help cover their bills, but what they signed was a transfer of everything they owned. Within weeks, Chad took out a $360,000 loan against the property. The documents listed him as the sole owner. There was no oversight, no family meeting, just a cascade of paperwork moving through banks and title companies. The first loan drained nearly half the home's value. Chad assured Hank and Helen that the money would cover their needs, but the couple saw little, if any, of it. Instead, another loan followed, $65,000, then a third for $47,400. Each time, the house shouldered more debt, while the couple's security slipped further away. The equity they'd built over decades vanished in less than 2 years, replaced by a mountain of obligations they never agreed to. Chad made a few token payments, just enough to keep questions at bay. But the bills soon piled up, and the lender's warnings grew urgent. By 2016, every loan was in default. The house, once a bulwark against uncertainty, became a ticking clock. Foreclosure notices arrived, dense with threats of eviction. But Chad kept the truth hidden. He told Hank and Helen not to worry, that everything was under control. Sunday mornings became a ritual. Chad would arrive early, coaxing Hank and Helen out for brunch or a drive. While they lingered over pancakes or strolled through the park, strangers walked through their living room, guided by real estate agents. The house was quietly listed for sale. Open houses ran while the couple was away, their family photos still on the mantle, Helen's curtains framing each window. Prospective buyers wandered the halls, measuring rooms, picturing a future that no longer included the people who had built this home from nothing. On paper, everything Chad did skirted the edge of legality. The loans were approved, the signatures in order. But the reality was far more brutal. Every document, every check, every Sunday outing chipped away at the only safety Hank and Helen had left. By the time the neighbors began to notice, nearly all of the equity was gone, and the house was no longer theirs to save. A knock at the Emersons' door broke the uneven quiet of the neighborhood one afternoon. Doug Emerson opened it to find a stranger, cheerful and polite, introducing himself as the soon-to-be owner of Hank and Helen's house across the street. The words landed like a warning bell. Doug's mind raced. He knew the Kaweckis had never talked of leaving. The couple's routines hadn't changed in decades. Something was wrong. Doug and his wife, Linda, watched as real estate agents came and went, sometimes with groups of buyers trailing behind. The open houses always seemed to happen when Hank and Helen were out with their grandson. The Emersons started asking questions, quietly at first. They checked public property records online and found the deed had changed hands 2 years earlier. Chad Moore's name was the only one on the title. The couple's names were nowhere to be found. Further digging revealed a string of loans, hundreds of thousands of dollars borrowed against the house, all in Chad's name, all in default. Doug printed out the records and crossed the street. He sat down with Hank and Helen at their kitchen table, the same table where Chad had once promised to protect them. The truth hit like a tidal wave. Their home wasn't just listed for sale, it was already deep in debt, with the threat of foreclosure closing in. The couple stared at the papers, disbelief giving way to heartbreak. Doug and Linda became their lifeline, helping them understand the maze of legal filings and deadlines. Together, they reached out to an attorney and filed for an injunction to stop the sale, hoping to buy time. The Emersons stored boxes of Hank and Helen's belongings in their own garage, bracing for the worst. News of the betrayal spread quickly. Neighbors who had known the couple for decades stopped by with casseroles, hugs, and words of support. Some offered to help with legal fees, others with moving costs. The story traveled beyond the block, drawing strangers from across the country into a growing circle of concern. As the legal fight began, the sense of outrage and disbelief united the community. For Hank and Helen, the pain of betrayal was softened, just a little, by the compassion of people who refused to look away. The Emersons, once just neighbors, became guardians, proof that even when family trust is shattered, compassion can still find a way in. On June 3rd, 2016, a GoFundMe page called Save Hank and Helen's Home went live. By nightfall, donations poured in from every corner of the country, $25 here, $100 there, sometimes more. Within weeks, the total surged past $134,000. Notes arrived with each gift, for my own grandparents and you deserve to feel safe. Some donors lived down the block, others had never set foot in California. The story of a couple betrayed by their own grandson struck a nerve far beyond Thousand Oaks. Volunteers showed up at the Kaweckis' door, arms full of boxes and packing tape. Retirees from the local senior center offered rides to doctor's appointments and helped fill out paperwork. A roofer drove in from Santa Barbara to patch a leak for free, while a woman from South Carolina called to say she'd open her guest room if Hank and Helen needed a place to stay. The Emersons' garage filled with the couple's belongings, old photo albums, a battered suitcase, Helen's favorite mixing bowl, each item carried with care by neighbors, who, until now, had only waved from across the street. The money covered legal bills, moving costs, and the first month's rent on a mobile home. But the real gift was harder to measure, a sense that, even after family trust had been shattered, strangers could still be counted on. In a world where betrayal can come from inside your own living room, Compassion arrived from places Hank and Helen had never even heard of. For a moment, the darkness lifted. Kindness, unasked and unearned, found its way in. The fight for justice stalled almost as soon as it began. Hank and Helen's attorney filed suit, hoping the courts would see through Chad's betrayal. But the legal process dragged on, tangled in paperwork and delays. Months passed, then years. The civil case never reached a resolution. Chad disappeared, leaving no forwarding address, no apology, and no repayment. The lenders, protected by the signed deed and the stack of loan documents, walked away unscathed. Not a single criminal charge was filed. Prosecutors reviewed the case, weighed the evidence, and ultimately did nothing. For Hank and Helen, the law offered little comfort. They had signed the deed, even if they hadn't understood what it meant. The system, built to protect the vulnerable, looked the other way. This is not an isolated story. Across the country, elder financial abuse is rampant. 1 in 10 seniors will be targeted, and in 60% of cases, the abuser is a family member. In California alone, thousands lose their homes each year to schemes like this. Deed theft exploits trust. An elder abuse attorney explains, seniors sign believing it's a loan, but the reality is they're giving everything away. Policy is lagging behind the problem. Laws like AB 1410, which could have required extra checks and notary screenings for seniors, arrived too late for Hank and Helen. The courts offered no closure. Hank and Helen spent their final years waiting for a justice that never came. Their home was gone, their trust shattered, and the person who betrayed them faced no consequences. The law's silence echoes, not just for them, but for every family who believes protection is guaranteed. Today, elder exploitation by family is rising. Reported cases have doubled in the last decade, yet most go unpunished. Trust, once broken, leaves scars no courtroom can heal. For every Hank and Helen, there are thousands more, unseen and unheard. The real test now, will we protect the vulnerable or let silence become complicity? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.